On this week's episode, we have Dan Claps, who is the CEO or president of Voda. Which one do you go by, Dan?
Titles don't really matter to me, but if we use one, it'd be CEO.
I agree with you 100%. I think titles are only have as much relevance as you give them, right? But why don't you give us your little spiel, and then we're going to dive in because I actually got to meet Dan a few months ago at a very fun conference. We had a great time, both during the conference, but then hanging out with a bunch of franchise professionals afterwards, got to know each other a little bit. But at the time, Dan, you didn't even have a franchise. And that was just November of 2022. And now here we are, and you guys have a full-fledged franchise up and running with franchisees signing on, excited to build and grow your brand. And so we want to hear all about that in this episode. But before we get too far down the road, why don't you give us your little, 30-second introduction as to who you are, where you came from, and how you got here.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for having me on the show. Excited to have this conversation. I'm Dan Claps, and I've been in franchising since 2014. I started out as a franchise consultant, which is, if you're listening, someone that helps people explore owning a franchise business. I had a business in college in the staffing space and did well, but really didn't have a business. I had more of a job. Everything was dependent on me. My team only knew me. My customers only knew me. And in my early 20s, I learned that really was not a business. It was a job. And so instead of being able to exit that business through some type of sale, really had to just wind it down and move on. I joke, no one would even pay me to take or I couldn't pay someone to take that business off my hands. And so I wound that down and started looking at franchise opportunities in early 2014. Fell in love with franchise consulting and started doing that for about 2 years. And did well, but I realized that I was on the phone from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. And if I wasn't on the phone, then I wasn't making money. And I was repeating the same mistakes that I had already made. And so I realized that my core competency was really lead generation in my past business, in my franchise consulting business. And so I ended up starting with a partner, a lead generation company called Career Transition Leads. And that company from 2016 to 2022, I built and ran. We had a lot of employees, large, business, and got to help people all over the country become a franchise owner, work with lots of franchise consultants and lots of franchisors. And so looking back, last May, I was able to exit that business and kind of live out that original goal of selling a business when a PE firm acquired it. But looking back, it all was by design because I spent a decade learning what to do and what not to do as a franchisor through that company.
Oh, yeah. I mean, trial and error, right? That's like the best teacher until unless you can find the shortcut around it, right? That's one of the things I'm always telling our clients is what makes me so valuable to them is I'm the one who went through the trial and error, and they get to skip it by working with us, right?
Yeah, no, 100%, April. And there's a lot of value in skipping mistakes. For me, what happened was it gave me, my previous business gave me a visibility into all the players in franchising. So when it came to building a team, I was able to put the right people in the Voda company and in Franchise Playbook, our holding company, that have already made mistakes. Our COO, Zach, has been a franchisor for like a decade, and our whole team. And so a lot of times what you did previously was really just the road to get you to where we are today.
100%. It's interesting. I always find it interesting to look back on the path and the struggles that you had at the time that felt like they were derailing you from where you wanted to be. And now as we look back, we see that without those, we wouldn't be where we are today.
Yeah.
So, okay, so Voda. So tell us a little bit about Voda and how did you decide that this is the franchise you wanted to start and grow?
Yeah. So, when I exited my previous business, I had the opportunity to stay on as, as a executive in the company. And as time progressed, I realized that that really wasn't the right fit for me. And candidly, nor was I the right fit for that company anymore. I'm an entrepreneur and I like to start and build, but I don't necessarily know if I'm the best to continue to run something at a certain stage. It was 7 years. It was time to move on. But through that experience, when I sold that business, I had a requirement, part of my agreement to stay on and work there for a period of time, 3 months. And during that time, I learned a lot because the company was and is owned by private equity. I have a lot of respect for that firm. And I learned how to build teams and how to align your team around the business. And remember, a private equity firm can run a business without being in the day to day. So I learned a lot from that experience. And in early September, when my time there was over, I knew I wanted to stay in franchising. I knew I wanted to be a franchisor. And so partnered with our COO and our co-founder, Zach Nolte, and basically said, look, here's the vision. We're going to have 10 brands over a period of time, utilizing my lead generation background and your operations skill set. And I think we can make a great team. And so Zach came into Franchise Playbook, and the first conversation we had was, hey, everything you would have done differently, go write that down. Let's bring that right into our system and start from day one without any mistakes. And so Franchise Playbook is the platform that owns Voda, and we'll have multiple brands over time. Our thesis around Franchise Playbook is a couple things. Number one, we have 4 pillars of support. I call the playbook pillars of support. Pillar 1 resonates around lead generation, customer acquisition. Pillar number 2 is around finding employees. We have a program called Talent Scout, which actually helps find employees with our franchisees. Pillar number 3 is around the administrative side of the business, bookkeeping, KPI tracking, everything that can take off the plate of the franchisee, we do. And then support, training both early, training later, training ongoing. It fascinates me that a lot of franchisors don't invest more in training and with people like yourself, because that's what's going to produce more revenue. So sorry to keep this short. Once we identified those pillars and put them in place, we looked at what vertical we wanted to start in, and restoration just checked every box. And so once we decided on restoration, went through a whole acquisition process and deal sorting process. Fortunately, we were able to do that in an expedited time frame because of my lead gen ability. But we found the Voda business in October. So at November, I was probably just not talking about it yet, and made the acquisition in February, rebranded in March, and then launched in April of this year.
I mean, that is super fast. That is like, for anybody who's listening who has either looked at buying a business or sold a business, that time frame is pretty quick to go from initial conversations to close deal. And then for you to then, on top of it, rebrand and launch it as a franchise. That's just, it's exciting. It had to be a very just a ton of momentum through that period of time.
Yeah, I mean, again, we're operating like how a private equity firm operates, but we're not mandated by anyone. Would I recommend what we did? No, it was high risk and it worked out. But we started the processes in October, and we acted as if we had already done the deal. My partner, our founder, the business, he's an amazing person. I knew in my gut we would work well together, but we actually put infrastructure and investment into the Voda business before we even had a deal made. And we said, look, if worst case it falls through, we know we want to do restoration. We'll apply this to another business. But it certainly, I always explain to people that we didn't do all of this in, February to now. We really did it since like November to now, because we took that risk. But yes, it has moved fast. Our team works really hard. We're moving at a rapid pace. Trying to make up for some lost time because we just want to get this thing off the ground.
Yeah. Well, and what we appreciate, because one of our core focuses here on the Infinite Franchisee Show is truly getting the holistic approach to training and support so that people can go from an ex-corporate employee to an entrepreneur. So many people do exactly what you mentioned earlier in the episode, which is they buy the business, they invest in the business, and then they kind of stop, right? They take that one big risk, and then it's like, okay, my risk taking's done. I can just settle into operations now. And when you do that, you've bought yourself a job. You are now an employee. You have to, a true entrepreneur is always taking risk, because that's what grows, right? Is the next thing that step that's outside your comfort zone that you were in when you were an employee. You've got to reframe everything you're doing in order to truly become someone who grows a business instead of operates inside of a business. So we love hearing from franchisors like you who have prioritized training and support, and not just lip service. And that's not to be unfair to other franchisors, but you're backing it up with actual pillars and a plan and a structure and strategies. And that's something we are really excited about here on the Infinite Franchisee Show, is the concept that franchisees need more than just, hey, here's the model, here's what makes our product special, and here's our CRM and how you ring it up in the POS system, which I find is a lot of what young franchises provide, is just the bare basics of the model. So.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, with what we're doing here, there's a saying, when you invest, like, to live off the interest, not the principal, right? Don't touch the principal. I look at Voda and Playbook like an investment, and instead of living off the principal, which would be trying to pull out as much money as possible, reinvesting it again and again and again, and living off of my other income, because it's a good business is like a good relationship. It should get better as time goes, right? And the more you invest in it up front, the better. And so, yeah, we're investing in success coaches. I think the statistic is 1 in 30 franchisees, you add a success coach. We're doing it 1 in 20 at this current stage. I mean, as we in our business plan, investments in technology, investment in branding, the Voda brand. I wish I could say I made the Voda brand. I didn't, but we made an investment in that, because at the end of the day, when you invest in a franchise, you're buying a brand, and you're buying training, and you're buying support. And what I always explain to our franchise candidates when they're looking at our brand is, it's not that Voda is known all across America at this time. When you bought a McDonald's in the 50s, you didn't buy it because you knew McDonald's. You bought it because the system, and because those golden arches would stand out no matter where you put them. We believe that Voda, when it comes into a neighborhood, it does turn heads. The trucks are very unique, and the branding, it helps get people into the customer acquisition process.
Yeah, that's great. And I actually, before we even went live, I'd mentioned, and this is both, we use this will be published on our podcast. It'll also be published on our YouTube channel. And we mentioned your background because I love the colors. It's clean and fresh. I do think it stands out. It has that subliminal messaging kind of piece to it. You're a restoration company, right? So I'm sure there was a lot of creative intentionality behind everything that's been done, but just as a potential consumer, what strikes me is it looks like water, but it looks, like fresh, clean, restorative, right? Refreshed. And so great job on that. Really enjoy the branding.
Oh, thank you.
So right now you're already talking to franchisee candidates. Where do you all stand right now as to what you're projecting as far as adding territories this year?
So we'll have about 20 territories awarded by the end of the summer.
Oh, wow.
We're trying to make sure to move at a pace. I don't want to go like this. I don't want to go like this. I want to go like, that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm realizing it's a podcast. We want to go up and to the right. If you're not watching my hand signals. Again, finding franchisees is kind of lack of challenging part for us, just because of my background, we're able to find franchisees through consultants, but we're also able to find franchisees organically due to my lead generation background. So finding franchisees really is not our biggest challenge. Our biggest challenge is just making sure, we've put our bar, we just had this conversation on my leadership team call today. When you compare Voda, and I don't mean this arrogantly, but when you compare Voda to 99% of emerging brands, we're doing things that no one's doing. But we only compare ourselves to the top. We only compare ourselves to the brands that, you see really doing extremely well. And so for us, it's delivering on what we've set that bar to be. It's not a small bar. And so it's a lot of push, and sometimes we get tired, but what we're doing, I believe what we did in 3 months, people would take a year. And I think what we can do in 3 years, people would take, 30 years. And so we're moving at an expedited time frame. And so there's a lot of pressure in some of the benchmarks we've set. But I think that when people invest in our franchise, they see the level of drive that our team has. And so, a franchise relationship is a two-sided relationship. It's like any relationship, right? Like, we have to push franchisee partners to succeed and think bigger. And then they should push us to keep thinking bigger and delivering on the things we've said we delivered. We've said a lot of things we're going to deliver. So I think for us, the challenge is just making sure we keep sticking to aiming for that bar.
You bring up an interesting point about what you're doing that other emerging brands are not doing. And one of the things that I find maybe isn't well known to business owners prior to making the decision to become a franchise is really the investment that it takes to convert your small business into a franchise. And then you just have to have such a large investment to not only make the conversion, but then also, like you're doing, is investing again in infrastructure and branding and lead generation and all these different things. And I think a lot of people get stuck because they just didn't anticipate the level of investment they needed. Have you seen that to be true in the industry as well?
Yeah, I believe that, like, the investment to get a franchise off the ground is 3 times what people tell you, at least. And I knew that going into it. Again, fortunately, my previous business allowed me to just, over drinks and lunches and podcasts and webinars, hear all these things over 10 years and learn and synthesize that information. But yeah, franchising, I think it's more than you would think if you want to franchise your business. And I think when you buy a franchise, unfortunately, it's a larger investment than you may think. Someone once told me that when people buy a franchise, they have to have at least 2 of the 3 things. And what they are is, if you say it's going to be this much time commitment, this much money you can make, give or take, on the I-19, and this type of investment, you better make sure at least 1, 2, or 3 worked. In other words, if a business makes more money than you thought, but takes more time, and the investment was, about the same, that's fine. If a business takes less time, makes a little bit less money than you thought, but you hit the not a lot of time and not a big investment, that's okay too. Like, if you don't have 2 of 3 though, it's a problem, right? And so I look at, when people get into our business, I always tell them, you can either aim to make more money, you can aim to be involved less. It's hard to have both in the beginning. And so same with all the support verticals we offer. We have tiered services. Someone wants to use more of our services, it costs more, they can do less. If you want to do more, then you pay less, right? Everything's a trade-off. But I think that when people get into a business, that the one epidemic I do see in franchising is this rumor or lie, frankly, that you're going to buy a business and do nothing, which I see more and more. And I just told you, we take away the lead generation, appointment setting, bookkeeping, lots of support in the back end, help with hiring, we help with payroll, but there's still a lot to do in a business. And, you could be running a business semi-absentee, but you still have things to do. And so, like, the last thing I'll say on that is, like, whenever I talk to a candidate and they're looking at an absentee business, I'll say, I have two questions for you. One, if it's absentee, why are they franchising? If I didn't need you to be a franchise partner, I would just open up corporate stores. I'd get money. It'd be easy enough to get money. And I would just open 500 stores without franchisees. Why would I? It's a two-way street. There's a reason you need a franchise partner. And I always say that kind of facetiously with franchise consultants. I say, oh, we show this brand because it's fully absentee. And I joke, well, then how many of them did you buy? Because if something's truly that absentee, then you should own one, right? So I'm obviously joking a bit, but I think when you look at buying a franchise, the first year or two, you're going to have to put work in. You're going to have to work as hard as you work for someone else, for yourself, for a couple of years.
Well, I agree. And I think one of the other things that's lost on new franchisees who maybe this is their first business to own, so many are like, okay, I can do that, right? You have the people who want the semi-absentee who don't quite know how much or how long they're going to have to put in that extra grind, right? But then you also have the people who come in and are naive and say, okay, I'm happy to do that. I'll work as hard as I need to work for the first 2 years because I know it's going to take me where I want to be, right? Which is true, but there is always a faster path. Like if you have the capital to make certain investments, you can actually grow faster and cut down on the amount of time where you're grinding, right? But people don't always understand. Like I think the adage, oh, you got to have money to make money. That's true, but I think more importantly, you need to have money to grow a business, like to accelerate a business.
I think you're spot on. Goes, to that point of like trade-off. You could start a business, try to pull, like that was my struggle in my last business. There was just a disalignment around, there's a certain amount of money that you make. And then like, I don't know, I don't mean that to sound so nonchalant, but there's a certain amount of money. And after that, like, you don't need it. You don't need it every year. You can take a break. You can take, I've always been fascinated by that. I see people that have substantial EBITDAs in their business owner with substantial profits, and they're so afraid to reinvest in their business. And it's a scarcity mindset. And really it's, there's a great book called The Enterprise Value. And it talks about as we get older, and more importantly, as our business starts to exceed our wildest dreams, if you get it to a point where it's worth more than you thought it would be, our brain starts to shift to risk mitigation. Yet if you were to do even a third of what you did to get to where you are, you can continue to grow and continue to take some calculated risks. But what they say is that most people, when they get to the point where they replace their income, they completely stop taking the risks. There's a great study on insurance agents that when they were selling, especially like back in the 80s and 90s, when they would sell life insurance and get to a certain residual, let's say 6-figure residual, $100,000 a year residual, it'd stay there. Even though it's residual, all they have to do is do the same thing again, and they can double it. People usually stop. And so for us at Voda and at Playbook, like we definitely are looking for people that want to keep going and want to, really build an empire.
I think that part of that too, and this is kind of where our wheelhouse is. I think part of that is that people are doing the same thing, right? They grow their business to a certain point. And at that point, where the effort would need to change is they have to learn now what they don't know that they don't know. And if they're making good money, they're like, I don't need to necessarily do that. And no one's coming to me and saying, hey, let me challenge you. Let me show you some things, right? When you're just like an independent insurance agent, you don't have a franchisor or anybody saying, let's go to the next level. Let me show you some new things you can do to get to the next level and only a third of the time that you did. Or like, I think that plays into it as well, because particularly entrepreneurs, we like a challenge, right? I'm way more productive if I have multiple balls I'm juggling. If you take everything away, I'm like, oh, this is like vacation time. And I kind of slow down. So I need a lot of things just to challenge me and keep me interested in my attention and kind of keep me laser focused and be more productive and more efficient, I would say.
Yeah. life comes in seasons, right? Like sometimes you're gonna have to work really hard and then it gets easier and then it gets hard again. Not just work, everything in life, right? Relationships, children, work, everything. Things come and ebb and flow, in my opinion. And so like I went through that. I had an easy season at one point. I'm not in the easy season currently. But 36 months in, maybe you slow down for a year and then you pick back up. Like I think life is it's not a sprint, it's a marathon, but you have different paces at different times.
Yeah. Well, this has been an awesome conversation, Dan. Thank you so much for joining us. If you want to learn more about Voda, then check out the show notes. We'll have ways for you to check out the brand and get in touch with Dan there. And this has been just so great, Dan. I really enjoyed talking to you, and I hope that we get to talk to you again in the future and continue to collaborate.
Yeah, absolutely. It was great chatting with you too, April.